Hey, thank you for joining me for episode 5 of Remember Tomorrow. I'm Paul Noyola. I'm going to be sitting down with the Sabine County Extension Agent, Mr. Ronald Barlow, today. We're going to be talking about historical things from this area, him growing up in Pineland, all the way to his duties there at the Extension Agent's office. So let's make welcome Mr. Ronald Barlow. You guys had a busy last week up there in Sabine County with what happened in St. Augustine with that tornado. Where is your office located at?
My office is in Hempfield, just off the courthouse square.
You guys didn't have any bad weather up there, did you?
We didn't, but I'm the county extension agent for Sabine County, and extension has a role in disaster relief and recovery. And
I didn't know that.
I was there in St. Augustine before daylight last Wednesday morning to help with that.
Yeah. So as the extension agent, what in a disaster like that, in an event like that, what is your role? What is your duty?
Our role is to assist with any livestock, companion animal, the effects it has.
What's a companion animal?
Dogs, cats.
Gotcha. Okay.
People's household pets.
Because in an event like that, I know when there's floods or hurricanes or something and people leave, a lot of times they'll just leave their animals, won't they?
Right. And in a case, so many people have companion animals inside nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
And like there in St. Augustine, as those people moved into shelters, and Red Cross and such doesn't allow the animals in because of other folks' allergies.
Yeah.
So we set up another place to take care of the animals so that the people are not concerned and don't have to abandon their animals.
Well, that's a really good thing. That's great.
Right.
Yeah, because they're parts of our families, and so many of us,
right.
and being apart from them like that for those people could probably just be stressful. But like you said, knowing that they're being taken care of and stuff can kind of ease their mind with everything else that they're dealing with at the moment. I'm really interested in you because you grew up in Pineland. Is that right?
I own a farm just about 2 miles out of Pineland.
Yeah, well, tell me about that. I'm curious to know how you grew up. What was Pineland? What was Sabine County like through your eyes at the time when you were a kid growing up? And I'm just as early as you can remember. Tell me about your setting growing up there.
Well, to start from day one, I was born right here in Jasper at the Hardy Hancock Hospital at the northeast corner of the square, about 2 blocks from where we're sitting now.
Uh-huh.
I've been told I was born in the room that my great-grandfather died in 1925 after he was shot. And
I bet there's a whole story
a whole nother
back there,
story
yeah.
there. But I was born there August 2nd, 1960, and was back in Pineland probably within 2 days, and majority of my life's been there ever since. I have left Pineland 2 or 3 times in my life seeking fame and fortune, but
I think we all did that.
Most of the time I was gone, I was trying to figure out how to get back there.
I hear that a lot. Yeah. So you said you grew up on a farm. Tell me about the farm and just your childhood.
It was actually my dad bought the farm the same month that I was born from his father. It had been in the family since 1936. My great-grandmother had lived on the back side of the place. My dad grew up in the same house that I grew up in. We still own it. My mother still lives there. We've got about 100 acres. I still run beef cattle on all of that, and that's what we did growing up. So
just cows,
primarily
cattle,
cows, few horses when we were kids, and a few horses now for grandkids and such. But baling hay, cutting hay, it's pretty self-sufficient farm. Daddy tried horses a while. He tried hogs for a while.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, when I was a senior, he asked me what I was going to do after school. I said, well, I'm going to go to A&M and study agriculture. And he said, well, I don't know what those professors are going to tell you. He said, but I can go ahead and tell you there's no money in hogs, dogs, or horses.
He had learned that through trial and error.
He had. So we had tried, a little bit of everything. But, of course, it was always, by the 60s, everybody had a job, and the farm was just something you did after hours and weekends. And that's been the story of my life ever since. Wow.
What was Pineland like back in those days?
In the 60s and 70s growing up, it was a busy place.
Because Temple was Temple.
Yes, Temple. Matter of fact, the sawmills had been running there at Pineland basically since 1902. Temple had been there since 1910.
Wow.
We're there for over 100 years.
Yeah, I didn't realize that.
And it was Temple Lumber Company until 1956 when it merged officially on paper with Southern Pine in Diboll, but it had always been owned by the Temple family, both had.
Yeah.
But it was strictly a company town until just prior to the time that I was born. I think 1958, the company sold the houses to the people that lived in them. But
and when you say that sold the houses, explain what does that mean?
Well, prior to that, the company owned every house, every building, every square foot of property inside the city limits. And if you worked for the company, they would find you a house and deduct the rent and utilities from your weekly pay. And
yeah, I think the refineries even down on the Beaumont area, Port Arthur and things, I think they kind of operated like that too, didn't they? Where they had a lot of housing that the workers lived in that housing earlier 1900s. I think that might have been the case because I think my dad's family may have been in a situation like that where they lived in some of that worker housing or something from the refineries. But
they did, and actually United Gas Pipeline Company, which operated a compressor station about a mile north of Pineland, which is still there and still operating until 1980, they had about a dozen company houses, we called it, that the employees lived in, and we actually moved into one of those in the mid-'70s because the county road got so impassable out to our farm that we couldn't get to school or work or anywhere.
Whoa.
We moved in closer to town and lived in a company house.
That's interesting. And those whole, I don't know what you would, those towns, those company towns like that, those company villages or towns, they had a general store or something, didn't they, usually? And
they
had their own tokens and their own money that the companies paid? How did that work?
That system operated until the 1930s when the federal government outlawed it and forced companies to pay in U.S. currency. But like in Pineland, originally the only store there was the commissary in downtown. So you got paid in Pineland, you got paid with cardboard tokens. I've got a set of those.
Yeah. Our house, me and my wife, our house is on the site of the old Remlig sawmill. And I've really gotten interested in the history of Remlig, and I'm always looking for photos or trying to learn more. I've seen a lot of the stuff that you've put online, and my mother's got a nice little collection of just area sawmills of the Browndale, the Brooklyn. There was a couple right in there that you probably know the name of each one and location, but Remlig is special to me because that's where my home is built, and just the amount of stuff I found during the clearing of the land and excavating. I would digging stumps out or something, go down 3 feet, and then there would be like this big concrete footing in the ground and just big, huge bolts. I found big links, big metal chain link type things that went on the sawmill or whatever. And it's amazing to think about the people that were there at one time, because how many people what was the population at the biggest at one time, just like in Remlig?
Remlig, Browndale, Pineland, all of those mills were large, very large mills for the time, and we're talking about the era between 1905 and 1925.
I'd heard at one time there was like 2,000 people living in Remlig or something, and
that would probably be right.
Yeah, and that one of the only doctors in the area was in that Remlig town at one time. I don't know how true some of the stuff I've read is, or whatever, but and the reason I bring all that up is because we're talking about the currency, and I know that Remlig had their own token also.
It was a square metallic token,
and I've seen them for sale on eBay because I'd just started searching for them, and I found one. Somebody was selling one on eBay.
They can still be found at Remlig. I've been out there with some guys that have good metal detectors, and a good person with the right equipment and the right permissions can still find those.
Yeah, well, like I said, during the course of just preparing our land and excavating and stuff, I found so much just railroad spikes and bolts and things. And the one thing that I've kept my eyes open for was one of those commissary tokens, because I thought that would be quite a find to find one of those.
Well, Alexander Gilmer built the sawmill there at Remlig, and there was already a Gilmer, Texas. So when they applied for a post office, he got denied on Gilmer, so they just spelled his name backwards and came up with Remlig. And matter of fact, I mentioned that I was born in the same room that my great-grandfather died in, but before he moved to Jasper, they were in Remlig at the mill just a couple of years prior to that. So I had several of my grandmother's siblings that were born at Remlig and delivered by the doctor you were talking about.
Wow. That's amazing. It's just, I've got maybe 2 or 3 neighbors within, several miles radius of me. There's nothing out there. It's national forest and timberland. And it's amazing to think about the community that was out there at one time. And, it's all gone now. But that land means a lot to me. And I have so much respect for it and the story it has. And I'm always open to learning more about that one. But the whole timber industry and the way it was in the early 1900s, that was there's so many stories there with how these communities were formed from these sawmill towns and
so much of what we know today through here all the way from Beaumont up to Tenaha on the railroad. I mean, it's here because of the railroad, which came through in 1902, and then the sawmills were here just as quick as they could get their equipment loaded on the railroad and dropped off up here and started cutting this virgin timber. And a lot of ghost towns in between that, I've made it part of my mission to help preserve so much of that history, because I'd hear stories and I'd say, I've never read that.
Yeah.
I think I've read every book ever published that covered this local history, and that's not in there. So that's part of my mission for the last 10, 15 years.
Wow, that's special, because that's something I hope we never lose, that we can always document those stories and those photos. I like to go to the Historical Commission over here and look through some of the photos and of the old times, and just every new story I hear about those days is so interesting to me. Just the hardships and the way that, life was back then, just trying to survive and and feed your family, and the way those guys worked. I mean, they didn't have the equipment that there is today, and I can't imagine the labor and the sacrifice that went into doing that job then.
Right. And, we produce more finished lumber in Pineland now than they did in the past with, but you drive through Pineland and you can see that it's just shrinking annually in population. But because 300 people can do what 3,000 did 100 years ago.
That's right. Just all the automation and technology that goes into it. It just, production goes up, but less manpower is needed. Yeah.
And that's the price of progress.
Right.
Pineland, to my knowledge, still has probably the most modern lumber mill in the South. It was built in 1903, 04, somewhere along, 2003, 2004, just prior to the 2008 recession.
Mm-hmm.
And so, people ask, what can we do to produce more? And I say, hey, we're producing more. We just don't need the labor that we did.
Right. Well, you were ready to get out of this area when you were looking towards going to A&M. I guess you graduated from Pineland. Is that where you graduated?
I did.
West Sabine is what they call it.
I went all 12 years to West Sabine.
How many people did you graduate with?
Had 42 in my graduating class.
That's a big class for that.
It was. Matter of fact, the class behind me was the largest until, I think, 4 years ago. One finally surpassed it.
I graduated in 96 from Brooklyn, and I believe I had 13 in my graduating class, and I wouldn't trade that for anything. I wouldn't trade that for anything.
Compared to 100 years ago, in the boom days of Browndale and Remlig and Brooklyn, I think when the old Central High School opened, which was about 1914, 15, somewhere along in there.
It was Central High School down on County Road 200 somewhere?
It's on old number 8.
On old 8, right.
If you turn, which is right there at the county line, where the two gas stations are across the road from each other, but you turn east.
Yeah, that's
96.
That is County Road 200 these days.
Okay.
But that is old Highway 8 that went up through there. So Central was back in there.
And not far off the highway, if you go about a quarter of a mile, I guess is it the old Remlig Road that goes left?
Yes, that's County Road 202.
If you turn on it immediately on your left, right on top of that hill in the pasture right now is where the old Central School sat.
Okay.
Right on the county. It was built intentionally straddling the county line.
How about that?
The county line ran right down the center of the main hallway of the building. It was a big 2-story wood frame building there. But
people,
when they opened for school, there were several hundred kids there the first day, and it was just a secondary school.
People just don't realize what Brooklyn and that whole area was back in the early 1900s.
Right.
And there's just so many stories there too, with the railroad being there, and then all the commerce that was in Brooklyn. They had car dealerships there. They had railroads, banks. It's amazing how, busy and how many people were there, how much commerce was there in Brooklyn. And what happened? There was a fire first?
Well, first we had the tornado was first through in 1913 and wiped out a good bit of the business district. But they rebuilt, because they were right in the early stages of the timber boom at that time. But then you had a fire, I think, in 1925 or 26, which was right at the end of the boom. I mean, actually, Remlig and Browndale, both mills shut down soon after that, so they didn't rebuild from that.
Yeah.
But there were like 13, 14, 15 businesses burnt to the ground
And that just
were never rebuilt.
It kind of just did it for the town. I guess a lot of people just left.
They did, and the people were already on their way out because they knew that the sawmills were about to cut out of timber.
Yeah, I remember being in high school. You know, you just one of my pastimes was getting out in the woods and going exploring. You know, and I know that down there on the on 1007 on the east side of 96, back in there by the railroad track, I remember walking and playing around back in there when I was in high school and finding an old mill site back in there with a lot of the concrete structures still there. What mill was that?
That was the Browndale mill, which was the largest in the United States at one point.
And it is back in the woods now, just overgrown. I mean, it's just a thing of the past. Nobody even knows. Nobody knows it's there, but so many people don't even know that site is still there. And a lot of these sites are still around. Some of them are on public land. What's the one out by Boykin Springs?
I'm drawing a blank.
Yeah, me too. But that one's publicly accessible there, and you can walk out. A lot of the concrete structures are still there, and it's neat just to see that history and try to envision what was going on there. 100 years ago, how many people were there, and how many lives, and and it just it's fascinating to think about that.
Oh, it is. And it my ancestors, I have to go back 4, 5, 6 generations to find a direct ancestor that didn't live within 20 miles where I live right now.
Yeah.
Which makes local history so fascinating to me because I find the ties, of my family and figure out why I'm there because of what happened, 150, 200 years ago.
Yeah. This episode of Remember Tomorrow is brought to you by Paradigm Yoga in Jasper, Texas. What? Yoga in Jasper? Yeah. Paradigm Yoga is located in Jasper, Texas. The studio is at 211 North Bowie Street in Jasper, next to Brent Moe's State Farm. They've got a wide range of classes. Never done yoga before? Doesn't matter. They have a friendly community of yogis that will help you get started. Nobody's going to judge you. Nobody's going to be tough on you. Just a wonderful group of people that practice yoga together. You don't need to be flexible. All you need is an open mind and a willing heart. Check out their schedule on the internet at paradigmyoga.com. That's PARADIGM yoga.com, or on Facebook at the Paradigm Yoga page. Just search for that. You should be able to find it. Wide variety of classes to suit you. Yoga Sculpt, where you use a little resistance in the yoga flows. Chair-assisted yoga for those that may be a little less mobile, and everything in between. So check out the schedule online, read up on what each class is about, or if you got a question, give Shona a call at 409-698-6335, or just read more online at the website at paradigmyoga.com.
But, prior to John Henry Kirby's building of the railroad up through here in 1902, they were all just subsistence farmers, unless they were on the Sabine River, with a business that operated off of the steamboat trade.
Yeah, I was about to say, what were they doing on the river? It was a steam, just transporting goods and things up and down.
Right. I mean, you could ship cotton out of this area if you could get it to Sabine Town or one of the other big river ports. And
wow.
One of my ancestors, Shadrach Morris, actually donated the land for Sabine Town, which in the 1830s, 40s, and 50s was one of the largest cities in Texas. Was the major port of entry for overland travelers coming into Texas. But, until Toledo Bend Lake was built, it was it had gone back to just a few little subsistence farmers there.
That's fascinating. I wasn't, unlike you, I wasn't born in Brooklyn. I wasn't born in East Texas, up this way, but I do have some ties through my maternal grandfather and grandmother's families up around the Lufkin area. I believe my maternal grandmother, and if I get this wrong, my mom's going to be upset with me, but but my maternal grandmother, I believe her family was one of three families that founded Lufkin, that stopped in Lufkin and founded it. It was the Massengills, the Albritons, and then there was another family, and I believe that was my grandmother's family were the Massengills.
Right.
And then my grandfather, he grew up in Fastrel, and I believe that was a little sawmill town out that way.
It was. It was a Southern Pine tied in with Temple, owned by Temple, and nothing there but, it's another ghost town.
Yeah,
it used to be a big sawmill city.
Maybe that's why I've got a little, I respect this stuff so much because I am kind of tied. I've got some family history that goes back to these sawmill towns and stuff, and just, I don't know, it's just a neat thing to think about the lives back then, the way people lived. And
it is. You mentioned your mother. I don't know if your mother told you how we met.
She did, and I was going to bring that up to you. That she did tell me that. She said that one day she was at home and this great big fella,
this big trespasser, was poking around in her backyard.
Trespasser comes poking around in the backyard, and I'll set this up so you can tell the story. But as a wedding gift to my mother, my stepdad bought her a small house, and they're funny like that, I mean, is that, and this small house, they moved it in and set it up, and it's just a beautiful little wood frame home, and it wasn't always a house, from what I was told, and I'll let you kind of get into that in a second, but you show up and you're looking at this little house and that's kind of set back behind her main house, and I'll let you pick it up from there and tell that story.
Well, that building was originally built as the office building for United Gas Pipeline Company at Magasco, a mile north of Pineland. Magasco's name is a breakdown of Magnolia Gas Company, which originally built the pipeline through first all-welded steel pipeline in the world. Came right up from Beaumont to Carthage, but passed right through Pineland, and they decided to put the compressor station there. I could spend 2 hours telling you the history there, but to make a long story short, I worked there in summers while I was going to A&M between the summers of 1979 and 82. And that was still the office building actually, it was replaced about 1981. And my dad was the last superintendent anyway, at Magasco before it eventually shut down in the 90s, but has recently been put back into use. But anyway, when they built a new office building, much larger than this one, and they sold all the company houses about 1980 and 81, and my dad bought the old office building and moved it to Brooklyn, where my grandfather used it as an add-on to his antique business, which included the old post office in Brooklyn and some of the old business buildings next to it. And they moved in the office building right behind it.
Who moved into the office building?
That was my grandfather.
Your grandfather moved into
Barlow.
For his business. Where was that at in Brooklyn? Where was that? Where did he set that building up at?
It's going to be on old number 8.
Okay.
Which crosses Loop, what is that,
149?
Yeah.
So right in there where the old bank and stuff was, I guess.
Yes. And if you knew where the old post office was, it was
didn't.
directly behind it. I think the slab's still there where the post office sat. But he sold antiques out of them the last 10, 15 years of his life.
Yeah.
And next thing I knew, the post office had been torn down and somebody had moved the building. And I was over at Brooklyn Cemetery one day and looking across there, and I said, aha,
there it is.
So I went over and met your mother and gave her the history of her guest house.
You said I had spent a lot of time in that building as a youngin', huh?
That's where I picked my paycheck up every Friday.
How about that? Yeah. So let's go to your A&M days. You go to Aggie Town up there in College Station.
Right.
You want to get into the ag field. I mean, what were your plans there?
Well, actually, my dad's worked in the pipeline business, worked in construction, oil field, worked as a roughneck back in the 50s, and then worked for highway construction in the late 50s and 60s as preparations were made for Sam Rayburn Lake to be filled up, and worked on a lot of the bridges and dams and roads prior to going to work for United Gas at McGasco in 66 or 67. But anyway, me, like most boys who grew up like I did, idolizing my dad, all I'd ever, I wanted to be a pipeliner or work in the oil field or work for the pipeline company. And they said, well, go to college. And I said, well, what degree should I get? And they said, just something generic where you can pick up a variety of degrees and, unless you want to be a petroleum engineer or something like that. I said, no, I just want to come back to McGasco and work. But my parents wanted me to go to college first.
Yeah. And
agriculture was in my blood. And my high school ag teacher, Ray Crocker, who's still living, 96, 97 years old, he said, well, if you're going to study ag, there ain't but one place to go. That's A&M. Of course, he was a Stephen F. Austin graduate, but he thought I could handle A&M, and I packed my bags 4 or 5 times, ready to give up and quit and come home. But fortunately, Mr. Crocker or my mother or my dad or somebody said, no, hang in there and try it. So I did make it through.
Yeah.
But I really never intended on being a school teacher.
Well, yeah, I was going to get to that. You were a school teacher for 24 years. I read a little history on you. I found some articles and stuff here and there about you doing that. You were an ag teacher though for some of that, weren't you?
I was. I was an ag teacher for 11 years, and then a high school principal for 11 more, and an elementary principal for 2.
And you mentioned your ag teacher, you getting his input on your future when you were at that stage of life. And I can think back to my ag teacher and how big a role and big of an influence he was to me. And I feel like that he was one of my greatest influences back in those days of me being in school.
And who was your ag
My ag teacher was Bobby Harris.
Mm-hmm.
And I love him to death. And he was tough on us.
Mm-hmm.
He was strict. He taught me. He gave me grit,
Right.
and he taught me skills. And he was tough on us as students, but we respected him, and I believe it made me a better person. And I owe a lot to him. Like I said, I had some just great experiences coming up through high school, through the ag program, through the shop program, learning trade, learning skills, learning how to weld and build things. And there's not a time today. My uncle, when I was even younger, before high school, my uncle was a welder and a pipe fitter and things. And I remember being 8, 10 years old, and him teaching me how to weld and cut with a torch and things when I was that age. And that kind of gave me the bug. So I pursued it more in high school, and just, learned, just had a desire to learn their trades. And so even today when I'm building something, whether it's out of wood or metal, immediately, I think about those days, I think about them, teaching me those things, and just great influence. Like I said, he was tough on us, but at the same time, he would take a group of us boys hunting and stuff, and do stuff with, teach us how to. I fished tournaments with him when I was in high school, so he was a friend to me, but I respected him, and he wasn't a friend like my buddy was in school. He was an elder to me and somebody I looked up to, but we still had that friendship. How would you say it? Just somebody, just a role model, I guess. Right. That you really respect, and I know that you being an ag teacher like that, I can't imagine how many guys that you taught how to weld and different trades and are about the ag stuff. I mean, they probably still carry that with them today. The FFA was real big. I was involved in that. So like I said, I just learned more from that part of my school days than anything else, and that I still carry with me today.
Right. And it, as you know, Paul, in these small rural schools, many, many times the agriculture program and the home economics program are the only two vocational programs in the school. Mm-hmm. And sometimes don't have both of those. As an ag teacher, I remember before I started my first year, my dad told me, he said, just remember that there's a bunch of boys out there that were just like me entering high school, that if they don't get it from that ag teacher, they're not going to get it. Mm-hmm. And my dad credits his ag teacher with being the reason that he graduated from high school.
Yeah.
And was very successful in everything that he did through life, because he left high school knowing carpentry, knowing concrete masonry, knowing how to weld, knowing mm-hmm. how to cut and fit, and knowing the basics of so much out there that doesn't just tie to agriculture, but ties to so many other things.
Just good life skills, from everything from changing your oil to, replacing a fixture in your home, with knowing how to wire things. I mean, my ag teacher taught me how to wire a 3-way switch and how to, right. all those skills that you carry with you.
And one of the sayings that FFA members had is, when I was teaching, it's not just cows, sows, and plows anymore. And it wasn't. And there was so much leadership training and skills that a kid could pick up through FFA involvement.
Yeah, it was definitely great for me. And I appreciate having that coming up so much. I think it made a huge influence on me to who I am even today. And I'm just afraid that, we're losing that a little bit. I know that some programs are getting cut at certain schools, and even down to, as crazy as this sounds, like I said about how my ag teacher was tough on us. He disciplined us. We did. I mean, because at that age, your mind's 100 different places and you want to act up and be funny and things, right. and that's not the place to do that when you're working with tools and things that can hurt you and stuff. So he was tough on us, and I think that even outside of maybe schools losing some of the vocational classes that they have these days, just the way that he was able to deal with us. Mm-hmm. Schools losing that these days is not a good thing, because he he would put a paddle on our butt,
Right.
you know, and I just don't think it.
And in my opinion, I'm mild mannered, soft spoken.
Mm-hmm.
24 years, I might have raised my voice 3 times, you know, in the heat of some exchange at school, you know. But those kids knew when I was an ag teacher, if I looked at them and motioned my finger, that meant they went and wrote their name on the chalkboard.
Yeah.
And I used the same system that my 2 agriculture teachers did, which Friday was payday.
Yeah.
So if you messed up on Monday through Thursday, you just put your name on the board, and everybody lined up on Friday for their pay.
Ours was due on receipt.
Right.
Ours was right then. And like I said, he was tough on us, but at the same time, and I think I could speak for a lot of the guys that I went through school with. We loved we loved him and respected him, and we would, you know, maybe go fishing that weekend or go hunting. He would take us to his place hunting or something, but we knew if we messed up, he'd get us straight too.
and I'm gonna assume that you were a lot like me and the boys that I grew up with. I mean, we were just red-blooded, all-American boys. We had a lot of mischief in us.
Oh, definitely.
And you know, nothing killed our soul more than have to sit down and listen to a lecture for 30 minutes. You know, when we mess up, just bend over, take those swats, and say, "I'm sorry, Mr. Harris," and go on about our business.
That's right. Well, I
always made them look me in the eye and shake my hand.
There you go.
And one reason my payday system on Friday worked out well is because that student had gotten past some of the emotions and gotten out of the environment that caused them to get their name on the board. And my anger or frustration at what they had done had sort of dissipated then too, so that it could really be a learning experience instead of just a reaction experience.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't trade my days the way that the ways that things were for us in our ag program. The way Mr. Harris was with us, I wouldn't trade any of that for anything. It just means the world to me today. And it meant the world to me at the time. I just, you know, like you said about with emotions and stuff. Yeah, you get kind of, you know, angry at the moment, but you knew at the end of the day you were still buddies, but you still had that respect for them, and it was all good. And looking back now, like I said, I wouldn't trade it for anything. So yeah, got a ton of respect for you for your contribution as an ag teacher also.
And I've got, you know, perspectives from more angles than most people have in their life, because I went to school at West Sabine for 12 years. I taught there for a number of years as an ag teacher.
Mm-hmm.
I was high school principal there for a number of years. I was elementary principal there for a number of years. My son went to school and graduated from there, so I saw it from a parent's perspective. And I was president of the school board for a number of years.
Yeah.
I tell folks I've sat in every chair there except for the band directors and the superintendents, and I never did want either one of those jobs. But, and that doesn't make me any smarter than anybody else, but that experience helped me.
Gives you good
in
perspective.
Decision-making processes and everything, because I could understand everybody's perspective.
Mm-hmm. Well, today in your role as the county extension agent, I don't even know what that job entails, but I think it's a broad duty, isn't it?
I've only held this job for a little over a year and a half. I started December 1st of 2017, and a year and a half later, I'm still trying to figure out what all falls under my hat, you know.
A lot, though, isn't it?
To do, and right. Of course, I came in with, you know, already knowing half the people in the county, having a fairly good grasp of what the needs were. But my focus has been trying to address some of the issues that I know we've been battling for years, as far as disseminating information and conducting programs to do that. I mean, the day the commissioners court voted to hire me, I told them, I said, I know if I can come in and get rid of fire ants, get rid of tallow trees, get rid of McCartney rose bushes in the north end of the county, get rid of the wild hogs that are tearing up all of our pastures and gardens and yards and getting out on the highways, and a couple of more issues that I could probably stay here till I'm 90.
Yeah. With the tallow trees and those, what was the rose? What was that?
McCartney roses.
McCartney roses. Are those invasive or they?
They are.
And I know what a tallow tree is. I'm familiar. I don't know what the McCartney rose.
They hadn't made it to the Brooklyn area.
Okay.
I don't think I've seen any in Sabine County south of Bronson yet.
So what is the tallow tree? What's the problem with the tallow trees? What did they?
Tallow trees are an invasive that they're just so fast growing. They, unless you get out there and do something about them every year, they take over your pastures.
Yeah.
They grow up in your fence rows.
I see that a lot down towards like Nederland and Beaumont, like where they've had a pasture or something, and it can just all be tallow trees.
Right.
And I guess that's what you're talking about.
And they're fairly easy to control. It's just that, nobody's really addressed that in Sabine County as far as making the rounds and telling people how easy it is to kill them and get rid of them.
Interesting. Well, you said something about the wild hogs too. That's something I'm a little more familiar with because I'm an avid hunter. I love being outdoors and in the woods. I love hog hunting. I love predator hunting.
Right.
I think that there's not enough people out there doing predator control these days.
Right.
There's a lot of different ways you can look at that. But I feel like good predator control can help your deer populations, and I think it can help your wild turkey populations. And that's something I really want to see flourish in this area is the wild turkeys. That's really important to me.
I think they're a big factor in the disappearance of the bobwhite quail.
Yeah, I went to a little film tour at SFA a few months ago. Ben McMasters puts on a film tour where he creates some films, and then he also has some other films in the tour that he has acquired through other filmmakers and things. And one was on the quail situation in Texas and how it's been affected by just different factors and stuff. But yeah, the predators definitely impact a lot of these things. And like I said, I don't think that people are really, coyote hunting or trapping as much as they used to. And I try to do a little, but the little bit that I do doesn't really put a dent in it. But back to the hogs, yeah, they are definitely invasive and they are destructive. I would like to think that there wouldn't be a hungry mouth in this country if we could somehow address that with the wild hog population that we've got.
It grabs your attention when you find out that there's more wild hogs in Texas than there are white-tailed deer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, we think they've always been here, and they have been here since 1500s.
The Spaniards bring them?
Spaniards brought them to Cuba and then into Florida, and this DeSoto and Coronado and Cortez and different ones came. They had, some hogs in their entourage, and invariably some got loose, and multiplied, which they can very fast.
Oh, yeah.
Which is the problem we have, and they've been here ever since. In my lifetime, of course, in the first half of this century, you could run cattle and hogs free range in Sabine County, Jasper County, all of this area, all of the land that belonged to Temple and to the big companies, National Forest and such. It was all open. There were no fence laws.
Okay.
My grandfather, Brink Powell, who lived in the Needmore community just west of Brooklyn, survived. He lived to be 89 years old, but anyway, he had over 100 head of cattle and probably a couple hundred head of hogs, and never had them in a fence unless he was pinning them up to sell calves or to work the cattle.
Yeah.
And he always said that most of Brooklyn survived the Depression off of his hogs and cattle. And he'd pull up to some of his kinfolk's house, and there'd be a hog hung in the backyard getting dressed with his ear notches in them.
Yeah.
And or with the ears cut off so that nobody could see whose hog it was.
Oh, wow.
But, we didn't have a wild hog problem probably until the late 60s, because there were enough hungry people and enough hunters to keep those populations down. And then when Rayburn Lake and Toledo Bend filled up and all those hogs started moving out of the bottoms and into people's cornfields and pastures and yards and backyard gardens, and all of a sudden everybody realized we got a hog problem.
Yeah.
When thousands of acres became flooded and those hogs had to move to higher ground. I can remember in the mid-'70s, me and my Uncle Mutt Barlow, who was a deputy sheriff in Hemphill for Sabine County for years, built a hog trap and trapped over 50 hogs in less than a month's time in the mid-'70s in our pastures. But when I came back in 1983 from after graduating from A&M, the hogs were gone. And I've asked every specialist, every biologist, and I haven't got an answer. I don't know if we hunted most of them out in the late 70s, or if a hog cholera or some other disease wiped them out. But nobody's been able to answer that for me.
Yeah, I'd never heard about that before.
But by the, early 90s, they were coming back, and they've doubled, tripled every year since. So that now they're probably our biggest problem in agriculture.
Yeah,
all across the South.
Well, with that being said, with one of the things that you've done this past year, you had a little tournament going on. I guess you could call it a contest. You called it Operation Porkchop, huh?
Right. I guess from day one of taking this job as county extension agent, I knew that was where I needed to focus some attention, because that was my number one call. Do you know somebody that can come trap hogs? Do you know somebody that'll come, bring some dogs and hunt hogs on my place? It was countywide, and I knew it was statewide and across the entire South. But I almost immediately, probably within a few weeks, started meeting with different groups. I met with the game wardens in the county. I met with the U.S. Forest Service personnel, the biologists and law enforcement, people with the U.S. Forest Service. I met with Sabine County Landowners and Leaseholders Association, which is primarily larger landowners who lease their land out for hunting. I met with hog hunters. I met with my beef and hay people, and all the while trying to figure out maybe the best coordinated effort to address it. And Operation Porkchop was the answer that I came up with.
Yeah.
And through it, I've got what we call our Sabine County Ag Committee, which is a core group of 6 men that I meet with regularly who represent all the different facets of agriculture in the county. They're kind of my advisory committee. I bounce things off of them. We plan stuff and this and that. But anyway, I met with them in January, and we kicked it off by February 1. But anyway, we started and had a weekly drawing. Whatever hunter or trapper, every time they reported the killing of a hog in Sabine County and filled out the appropriate report, we wanted to collect the data to find out, how they were catching them, what part of the county they were in, what type of hog. Was it a mature boar or sow, or was it a gilt or a young male? What type of bait they were using, what type of traps, what type of gates on their traps, so that we could capture all that data while we were doing it.
So not only were you addressing your problem there, you were actually just gathering data too through this operation. Wow.
And turned it into an educational
There you go.
deal also, besides making a dent in the population. But and some counties offer just a bounty, so much per head. I remember back in the 70s, for every pair of coyote ears you turned in at the courthouse in Hemphill, they'd give you $20. Just offered a straight bounty.
Yeah.
I couldn't do that because I didn't know if they were going to turn in 200 hogs or 2,000 hogs.
Right.
And the budget.
You couldn't really budget for what may happen. Right.
So we thought, well, let's just do a weekly drawing. And we debated for a long time. Most counties that have offered a bounty, the hunter just cuts off the tails and turns that in as their proof, or cuts off the ears.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that there are people, especially the recreational hunters, that don't necessarily eliminate that hog. When they do catch one, a lot of them move them to a hunting club or move them to another area, and there are some that are not educated in hog population growth that thought that we were going to get rid of all the hogs.
Yeah.
Which part of the process is, it doesn't matter if we'd have killed 5,000, they're going to be back next year. They just replenish the population so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, we settled on just cutting off the end of the snout. And I knew when they turned the snout in, that was off a dead hog.
There you go.
Or he was going to be dead soon, which was the purpose of the project.
Yeah. About how many people do you think participated this year?
We actually had 29 different people.
How many?
Turn them in.
How many hogs were eliminated?
362.
Yeah.
And that was through the months of February and March. It was an 8-week project. I did learn that next year that we will stretch out that probably to a 4-month period.
Okay.
Because I had 104 turned in the last week, which means that the hog activity and the hunting and trapping activity was picking up progressively with each week.
Yeah.
And we started out real slow, but the acorn production was just tremendous.
It was
this year.
It really was.
Deer hunting activity and the number of corn feeders out there on hunting clubs and on private property, just grows exponentially every year.
Yeah.
And those hogs really didn't start moving out of the bottoms and out of the woods and into the pastures and into the places where we could hunt them and trap them in force until early March or so.
Wow, that's
when
interesting.
It started picking up.
Yeah. So you think it'll be back next year, the program?
It will. We had a wild hog supper a couple of weeks after it ended to present all of our data and show people what type of trapping got the most in our county, what part of the county. I don't think it was a reflection of the population out there. It was just a reflection of where our hunters and trappers were going to get them.
Right.
But we had 125 people show up for that program, and through the whole process, I think I've had maybe 2 complaints, and those were from people complaining about trespassing.
Yeah.
And I don't think the program aggravated that, but to some it probably was perceived as that. If my program had folks out there that didn't know what they were doing and didn't know where they were hunting and what they needed to, and that's a big part of it too, educating those people to,
yeah,
we want you out there, but we want you in places where you got permission to be too.
That's not a bad not a bad percentage, I guess, with the amount of people that were out participating and
and just judging from sponsors' reaction, my ag committee was concerned. I had a goal of giving away $100 a week for 8 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the committee said, "Well, where are you going to find that money?"
Yeah.
I said, "Well, I'm just going to go to local businesses here and see if they'll pitch in $100 a piece." And some of them were truly doubtful that I could find $800 for it. And I found that within the first 2 hours the next morning. And by that afternoon, my phone was ringing from other businesses. "Hey, why didn't you stop here? I want to pitch into that."
Well, that's a good deal. I'm glad that they realized there's a problem out there and wanted to support your program and stuff. And I hope next year you have even more entries and more hunters helping address that, because it's definitely a problem. I look at hogs even not even being destructive to crops and land and stuff, but I think that they're also predators. I think that they'll kill fawns and, they'll, I don't know the numbers on it, but I think they're out there having an impact on our deer populations and even our turkey populations, probably with the hens nesting and stuff. And
that's why my program, I think, got so much support, is that I was going to say every person in the county, but I'm going to say every property owner in the county has been affected by wild hogs.
They've been impacted by it, for sure.
Whether they're planting, a plantation of pines and the hogs are rooting it up, or trying to cut hay, or trying to graze cattle, or trying to plant a backyard garden.
Yeah.
Or hunters who are seeing that their turkey restoration's not working, that their bobwhite quail restoration's not working, that are, and just seeing them, what they'll do with the baby fawns. And
you said something about the bobwhite. Has there been a program around East Texas to work on the quail?
Well, we've got a lot of people hatching quail, and actually have for the last 20 years. And some of that, may be that we're turning loose quail that are not real adapted for our environment. But a lot of those would have survived years back whenever the bobwhite quail were here.
Yeah.
But I think, and that's a combination of other predators too, fire ants and dogs.
In the program, in the film that was shown at that at that film tour, I think they contributed some of the problem with the declining quail population to a parasite, to a worm, parasitic, that was infecting these birds, and I I think it had to do with their eyesight.
And it could be.
And there was a program out on one of these ranches, and the guy that owned the ranch, I'll try to find this. Ben's got some of these films that he takes on the film tour. He's got them online where you can just watch them. If I can find that one, I'll put it in the show notes of this episode here, and people can watch it. But from what I remember, the rancher who hosted quail hunts on his property and was having problem providing birds for people booking these hunts, he was also a chemist or something like that, something with pharmaceuticals or something. So he started working on this little program and for himself, and I think he developed some kind of vaccine for these birds and was combining it in with feed, and I think he saw some good numbers from feeding these quail this to keep them from getting this parasite. You'd have to watch the film. I can't remember exactly. It was several months ago, but it was really interesting. I didn't realize that there was even an issue that was a problem. That the quail had kind of disappeared, and something I wasn't aware of. This episode of Remember Tomorrow is brought to you by Vective Media, providing professional video and photo services to the Lakes area for you or your business. You can see their portfolio or the detailed list of their services at their website at vective.com. That's VEKTIVE.com.
But we just have trouble with any ground nesting.
Yeah.
Birds, whether it be pheasants or turkeys or bobwhats. Fire ants came through here in the 50s or so. And anytime you get a invasive like that, you see a severe drop off in something. It's going to replace something.
Definitely.
Of course, my standard statement is we had ticks before the fire ants. And when I was a child in the 60s, when we came in off the farm or out in the woods or pasture or wherever, into the house, first thing you did was sit down and pick ticks.
Yeah.
Fire ants came through and got rid of the ticks.
Did they really?
They did.
The fire ants had an impact on the ticks.
On the ticks. I'm talking about the little seed ticks.
I got you.
And stuff that really were a problem. But, they say these Argentine or crazy ants or whatever they are that are coming through now, that they're going to get rid of the fire ants.
Oh, wow.
And probably sooner than we want. But they say they're going to be a worse problem than the fire ants because they eat insulation and they eat wood and they get into the electrical and houses and structures, and we're going to wish we had fire ants back. But
that's scary.
anytime you get something new, it's going to affect what was here before.
That's scary.
Sometimes we may not solve the problem. We may create a worse one.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Barlow, I could sit and talk to you for several more hours about all the stuff that you're interested in. And the bad thing is I'm going to think of 10 of the things I wished I would have brought up to you while we got to sit down. We've been talking for a little over an hour now, and I know you got to get back on into your day, and I don't want to hold you up anymore, but I really appreciate you sitting down with me.
You're welcome. And I'm just glad to find people that share some of the same interest. And, the day I met your mother there, and she asked me what I was doing in the Brooklyn Cemetery, and I don't remember whose funeral it was, but I have 23 or 27 direct ancestors buried in the Brooklyn Cemetery.
Yeah.
And I'm talking direct grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-greats. And some weren't originally buried there. Some were moved there when Sam Rayburn Lake came in.
Yeah.
But that just shows, and that's got to be close to a record, with somebody that has that many direct ancestors, that many generations that have all lived and died within, that, 5-6 miles of a cemetery to be all buried together. But, and that's where my interest lies.
Yeah.
Of course, I've got many, many, many interests and have worn lots of hats in my life. But, the older I get, the more important trying to figure out how to preserve their history comes
I
to
feel
me.
the same way. I feel the same way, and I don't have any really family ties in this area. Any of these stories in Brooklyn and stuff, but it's definitely close to my heart. The Brooklyn area and the history of it, and I hope that is preserved. And I'm glad that there's people like you out there telling those stories and sharing photographs and things. And speaking of, on Facebook, you've got a couple of pages that I always love to see come across my thing there, because you post some great stuff. One of them is Sabine County Agriculture.
Right.
And you post just ag related stuff. I saw a post on there the other day about what I guess it was the West Sabine FFA group
Had a tremendous day yesterday.
had done. Everything from that to informational articles on livestock or crops and things like in the ag world. Great resource there on Facebook. It's called Sabine County Agriculture. And then the other one, the historical page, Farm Road 1, from one end to the other. Definitely everybody needs to check that out. There's over like 4,000 members of that page.
Right.
And there's photos that come across that and stories and articles and things. Real quick, what was the name Farm Road 1? What's the significance of that?
Well, I joined Facebook, I think, in 2008 or 9. By 2012, I was in positions to where I could start posting some of this history.
Mm-hmm.
And I probably had 2,000 or 3,000 personal Facebook friends. And I started posting this local history. And I thought, half of these folks have no interest in this. So I thought, well, let me create another group so that my friends and anybody else wants to join.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, I don't want to just focus on Pineland, which is where I grew up, because I'm equally interested in Brooklyn and Remlig and Browndale, Bronson. And then it dawned on me that most of those communities were within 5 miles of Farm Road 1, which the southern terminus is just on the south side of Pineland, and it extends into St. Augustine County out the north end and it covers, the whole west side of Sabine County.
Yeah.
But, my history trickles over into St. Augustine County and down into Jasper County and even into Newton County. And one day I said, it's Farm Road 1 from one end to the other. And that kind of gives everybody an anchor so that when they see it, they know what area, without it narrowing the focus too much.
Well, it's a perfect name for it. And you got some great content on there. And I urge everybody that's got interest in history and in this part of East Texas to check that out. If I'd imagine most people already do, but if they don't know about that page, definitely go check it out, because you've got some great content on there. Mr. Barlow, I appreciate you joining me today, and we're gonna have to sit down again because I like I said, I know there's hundreds of stories that you can tell me.
You want me back, because like I said, I've worn lots of hats.
Yeah.
And gosh, I've managed the biggest chicken hatchery in the world. I've been department head of the second largest FFA chapter and ag department in the state. I've taught school in Russia. I've
wow.
worked for Temple. I've worked in the oil field. I've taught school, and now I'm the county agent.
Yeah.
And, it seems that my life and career path kind of veers off about every 5 to 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I plan on being the county extension agent till I'm about 90. I finally found that perfect job.
Well, good deal. It seems to me you're doing some great stuff there, and Sabine County's lucky to have you. And that's something I could sit down and talk with you. You mentioned the poultry stuff. You know, that interests me. I'd like to know about that industry in Sabine County and up north. And I just, again, I'll probably get us going again, but why don't you see the chicken houses down, you know where that line is? Why is that line of chicken houses north of that, and then there's no chicken houses, no chicken farms, poultry farms, south of that area, that if you drive north on 96 or wherever, you see that start?
You know, the broiler industry is as integrated as any agricultural commodity out there. Tyson Foods and Pilgrim's Pride and Sanderson, whoever it is, I mean, they own that chick from the time that breeder hen laid that egg till it's taken to the hatchery, till it's hatched and taken to the broiler farm, and then from there to the processing plant. And it's all economics. But, you know, in the 50s is when the broiler industry really took off in East Texas. I mean, Jasper had their own hatchery and processing plants and stuff, Gold Kist and others. The Hobbert brothers had a big operation in Sabine County in the 50s and 60s. But by, I'm going to say, the late 80s, the big integrators, the Tysons and the Pilgrim's Pride, had bought out all these smaller operators.
Okay.
And the location of their processing plant, their hatchery, and their feed mill determines the radius that they want to operate
That
within.
makes perfect sense. It's just all logistics then.
It's all logistics. And in 1990, when I went to work for Tyson the week after they bought out Holly Farms. And at that time, we had farms all over Sabine County. And matter of fact, R.L. McDaniel down below Hemphill in the Yellow Pine community hung on until just a few years ago.
Yeah.
And he was the furthest, and he was not economical, but he was always the top producer with every batch of chickens he ever grew, and he never gave them the excuse to cut him off.
Well, good deal. That's all fascinating to me, that whole industry. So it's kind of it'd be neat to talk about it a little bit more, but we'll get back together, Mr. Barlow, and talk about all those good things, some more historical things, and hopefully we can do that before long. But thanks for sitting down with me today.
You're welcome.
I sure appreciate
Paul.
it. All right, boy.
I've enjoyed it.
I have too. Thank you, sir.